Lords, I thank the noble Lord Teverson, for securing this debate and his clear and powerful introduction to it, particularly welcoming those telling quotes from local government officials. And I've enjoyed many of the contributions we've heard already from all sides of your Lordship's House. I particularly appreciated the contribution from the noble Baroness Lady Hayman. Her phrases from rhetoric to reality and from poetry to prose have been reflected in the speeches of most other noble lords. If this committee were marking the government's work on integration of policy making on the climate emergency, the results would surely not rise above D-. It's particularly a pleasure to follow the noble Lord Stunnell, whose 2004 Private Members Bill, then Act, for Sustainable and Secure Buildings was groundbreaking at the time. Such a tragedy that we've made so little progress on energy efficiency in the past 2 decades and are still building dreadful quality new homes immediately in need of extensive retrofitting, a process far more expensive than building right in the first place in our lax regulatory environment. Lord Stunnell summed up what's needed with new homes beautifully in a slogan that would even fit on the side of the bus: stop building badly. And I won't even start today on the Green Homes Fund. Even the government has admitted that was a disastrous, ill-delivered policy and another outsourcing disaster. The terrible quality of our housing is a tragedy for the planet and a tragedy for the households that have to live in such uncomfortable, inadequate environments and pay the heating bills for them. But as I turn directly to the motion before the committee, I should declare my position as Vice Chair of the Local Government Association. Reaching net zero emissions is a necessary condition to play the UK's essential part as a historically massive contributor to the climate emergency, as a former colonial power that destroyed much of the earth, leaving nations ill-equipped to deal with it. But it's far from a sufficient one, and our current rate of progress is far too slow, even our targets. We should be aiming for net zero at 2030. But climate's only one of our problems. We also have the crisis in our state of nature, our soils in disastrous condition, and a world choked with plastic waste, which makes this an appropriate time to mention that this is Reusable Nappy Week, an attempt initiated many years ago by the excellent Women's Environmental Network to highlight the damage, environmental and social, done by single-use nappies, a major source of plastic waste, on which there's been no effective government action. I mention that specifically because this motion focuses on the need for the integration of efforts of national and local government. And here's one good example of where excellent things are happening piecemeal at a local level, often relying on volunteer-led approaches such as nappy libraries. But austerity-crippled local governments, with their powers stripped away in our incredibly centralised political system, have little capacity to deliver the consistently complete services, nappy libraries, support groups, centralised laundry provision, needed to make reusable nappies better for parents, babies and the environment, the standard for all. What a criminal waste for the climate and for people to cut down a tree, pump up oil and turn it into plastic to produce an object used for a few hours at most before it becomes noxious waste set to remain in landfill for centuries or producing polluting gases in an incinerator. That's if it doesn't end up littering the local park. And while we're on the interlinked issues of climate and plastics, where is England's bottle deposit scheme? Not world leading, not even world trailing, but so far behind the arrangements in most comparable countries we're on another planet. Talking about the climate emergency in local government, it was really striking this morning to see an article on Bloomberg News, headline, "Cities are our best hope of surviving climate change," which notes that cities consume 2/3 of the global energy supply and generates 3/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this was, as the headline word hope suggests, a positive article. Top billing went to the fast-spreading globally 15-minute city proposal, the idea that when what you need daily for work, for leisure, for education and shopping should all be within a 15-minute cycle ride of your home in cities. The article notes, and I quote, "Paris has gone the furthest towards realising this urban ideal citywide," end quote. It also notes up that Barcelona has freed up entire swathes of its street grid to make pedestrian superblocks. Now, that's something I was working on with campaigners to try to get going in central London around Bloomsbury back around about 2008. Progress in the UK. Action is essential action for climate, for clean air, for cutting congestion and freeing the streets for people. Zilch. Now in the Bloomberg article, other places that get mentioned for city action. Chicago, where, quote, rooftop vegetation proliferated after a 2004 mandate required private developments to include sustainable elements, end quote. And the article notes, quote, Bogota's whole public transport system, including its nearly 1,500 buses, are on track to be fully electric by mid-2022, end quote. I contrast that with figures I came across this morning for the entirety of South Yorkshire, which has 36 electric buses, all in Sheffield. Back to the Bloomberg article and the good news. Izmir in Turkey gets a mention for heating an entire district using geothermal energy since 1996 and savings of 35% on heating costs for residents. There's so many good examples around the world. Great progress is being made, often led by local and city governments, and delivering, in the jargon, real co-benefits, improving the lives of households, reducing poverty and inequality. That's the climate good news. But positive mentions of UK cities in this Bloomberg story, there are none. When I sat down to think about this speech this morning, I realised with a sinking heart that I would inevitably be hearing that favourite government phrase, world leading. So I have a question, a challenge, if you like, to the noble Lord the Minister. Show one significant area where the UK is world leading in action, not words, not targets, not meaningless, legally binding rules that are nothing of the sort. For as the Independent Committee on Climate Change points out, we're not on track for the 4th or 5th carbon budgets, not even those target levels below what has been set now, but action on tackling the climate emergency. And before the noble Lord the Minister brandishes the purely statistical accounting of our territorial carbon emissions, let's note that that figure ignores consumption emissions. The emissions associated with a washing machine made in China but sold and used in the UK are our responsibility. Offshoring emissions is not cutting them, is not climate action. However, I always try to come back to the positive. So let's look at some of the positive things that are happening around the UK. In the other place, sitting, oven ready, a phrase with which the government used to be so enamoured, is the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. It has the support, last time I looked, of 118 MPs and peers, yet the government is denying the Commons parliamentary time to discuss it. Now, a letter signed by 100 climate experts and environmentalists calls for the government to back this bill. Commenting on that, one of the signers and designers of the bill, Professor Haig, told The Independent the law would replace sorely lacking mechanisms to turn ambition into reality. We have, the professor said, quote, a hodgepodge of green initiatives with no apparent joined up thinking while the Earth's temperature continues to rise, end quote. But I'm being positive. So the Scottish Government in December published a draft public engagement strategy for a net zero nation, an excellent model for Westminster to follow. And if that seems really politically unpalatable, call it something different. I really don't mind. The people of the devolved nations know that they are far ahead of Westminster on climate action, if still far from adequately advanced. It's one more reason why, at varying rates, they're moving in one direction across the range from indie curious to indie convinced. They can see their nation's government delivering when Westminster is not, pushed by parliaments truly representative of their people. But that's not to say, of course, that there are not lots of good things happening in England at the local level. As the noble Lord Teverson referred to, after Bristol Council, pushed by the brilliant councillor Carla Denyer, led the way, there are now 300 of the total of 404 district, county, unitary and metropolitan councils that have declared climate emergencies. There are also 8 combined authorities and city regions that have done likewise. Some are developing plans to actually achieve that. But we need integration, joined up thinking, the government working cooperatively with local government, not looking down on them. But again, I'm trying to be positive. Now, since I was focusing on cities earlier, to go to just one example of many thousands of smaller communities up and down the land who are taking action for themselves, I'll mention the village of Ashton Hayes in Cheshire, pioneering community of around 1,000 people, which adopted the idea of carbon neutral long before it was a catchphrase. It's really led in renewable energy and energy efficiency. But when I visited there years ago, while admiring the efforts, I did have to pointedly look at the number and level of private car usage. And those leading the charge could only agree with me. But while public transport provision was so poor, people had no alternative. This was not something a village of 1,000 people could fix. We're back in the need for integrated policy making and the provision of resources to bodies at the relevant level, not trickled out in tiny subs through government-controlled bidding processes, but shared around the country to allow local decision-making, local coordination and planning based on local knowledge and conditions. Democracy, it would be a really good idea, as the noble lady Baroness Sheehan reflected earlier. And back to my list of positives. Some of this would be really, really simple. One starting point would be within the ability range even of this government. Stop doing the wrong things. Fixing some of our mistakes would be easy. The government could implement a net zero test to ensure all new policies and existing action support the 2050 target and give the Climate Change Committee more powers to hold the government to account. That would kill stone dead, obviously indefensible government projects such as new roads and expanded airports. And another thing the government could simply do is create the bodies and structures already announced. The 10-point plan will establish, we were told back on November 18, a task force net zero. That was 123 days ago. Those were words, literally hot air. Where's the action? And as many other noble lords have referred to, where's the Cabinet Committee on Climate Change? And we have, finally, my lords, we have a new COP26 spokesperson. However, even if we're falling into having that. But however brilliant they might be in delivering words, or how shiny and new their backdrop, they can't do anything about delivering action. The climate emergency is a scientific fact. It doesn't respond to rhetoric. It doesn't respond to bullying. It can't be laughed off with a Latin quip. It demands action. Thank you, my lords.